The morning sun rose over New Terra like it had done for 12 years, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded the colonists why they had chosen this world. William Harper stood on his balcony, coffee in hand, watching the settlement wake up below him. 50,000 people called this place home now, and every single one of them had come here looking for something better than what Earth could offer. He smiled as he watched the farmers heading out to the fields and the miners preparing for another shift in the northern mountains. Life here was simple, honest, and peaceful. His daughter Sophie was already awake, preparing her classroom for another day of teaching. She loved working with the children, watching their faces light up when they learned something new. Her husband Jake had left before dawn to oversee the mining operations, always the early riser in their family. Sophie arranged the chairs in neat rows and pulled up the lesson plan on her tablet. Today they would learn about Earth's history, about the old days when humans fought each other over resources and territory. The children always found it strange that people used to do such things. War seemed like something from ancient mythology to them, not real history. The colony had grown steadily over the years, spreading out from the central hub where the first settlers had landed. Now there were residential districts, commercial zones, schools, hospitals, and even a small spaceport for the cargo ships that brought supplies every few months. The people had built something remarkable here, something worth protecting. William often thought about how lucky they were to live in such peaceful times. Humanity had learned its lessons from the resource wars over a century ago. Those dark days of fighting over water and minerals had nearly destroyed civilization. But humans had survived, united under one government, and promised themselves they would never fight like that again. Captain Lisa Garrett floated in the command center of Outpost Meridian, the small defense station that monitored this sector of space. Her crew consisted of just 15 people, barely enough to keep the sensors running and maintain the station's basic functions. Most days were boring, watching empty space and filing routine reports. The most exciting thing that had happened in the past year was when a meteor shower passed through the system and they had to track the larger fragments. Lisa sometimes wondered why Earth even bothered maintaining these stations when there was nothing out here to defend against. The Viridian Collective were peaceful traders who had nothing but friendship for humanity. Other alien species kept to themselves. The galaxy seemed like a safe place. She checked the long-range sensors again, seeing nothing but the usual background radiation and a few cargo ships making their way through nearby systems. Everything was normal. Everything was always normal. Lisa sometimes missed the excitement of her training days when instructors would run combat simulations and test their reflexes. But those were just games, preparing them for threats that would never come. Real life was peaceful, and she was grateful for that. Her shift would end in a few hours, and then she could relax with a good book and some music. Tomorrow would be another quiet day of watching empty space. Far beyond human territory, in the northern quadrant of the galaxy, the Krell Empire held council. The Krell were reptilian beings who had built their civilization on conquest and strength. For over 1,000 years they had expanded their borders, subjugating weaker species and taking what they wanted. War Prince Zathros stood before the Imperial Council, his scales gleaming under the harsh lights of the council chamber. He had been studying the humans for months now, watching their expansion into space, analyzing their defenses. What he found was laughable. These humans had colonies scattered across multiple systems with almost no military presence. Their defense stations were barely armed. Their cargo ships had no weapons at all. The council listened as Zathros presented his findings. He showed them how humanity had spread out like prey animals, focusing on farming and mining rather than building warships. He showed them the pathetic defense stations with their skeleton crews. He showed them colonies full of soft civilians who had probably never seen combat in their entire lives. The council members hissed with amusement. Here was a species ripe for the taking, one that would teach the galaxy a lesson about weakness. Other civilizations needed to see what happened to those who ventured into space without the strength to defend themselves. War Matron Shekra, the eldest council member, raised a clawed hand. She spoke of tradition, of the Krell way of testing new species to see if they were worthy of respect. Humanity needed to be tested. If they were strong, they would fight back and earn their place in the galaxy. If they were weak, they would retreat and learn not to expand beyond their means. Either way, the Krell would benefit. They would gain resources from the raid, test their military might, and send a message to other species that the northern quadrant belonged to the Krell Empire. Zathros proposed a limited strike against 3 human colonies. Nothing too large, just enough to gauge humanity's response and take what they needed. The council voted unanimously in favor. Preparations began immediately. Zathros would lead the attack personally, bringing glory to his family and demonstrating his worthiness to command larger operations in the future. The Krell warships departed from their staging areas, sliding through faster than light travel toward human space. Inside those ships, Krell warriors sharpened their weapons and dreamed of easy victory. Sophie was reading to her students about the ancient wars when the first explosion shook the building. The children screamed and she immediately activated the emergency protocol, gathering them together and moving toward the shelter in the basement. Through the windows, she could see fire blooming in the distance. In the western districts where most of the families lived, the air raid sirens began wailing, a sound that most colonists had never heard outside of safety drills. Another explosion, this one closer, sent cracked spider webbing across the classroom walls. Jake was in the mining complex when the alert came through. His first thought was of Sophie, and he tried calling her immediately, but the communication network was down. Above the planet, Krell warships had destroyed the satellite array in their opening salvo. He gathered his workers and ordered them into the deep tunnels where they would be safe from bombardment. Some of the miners wanted to go back for their families, but Jake knew that would only get them killed. The only way to help anyone was to survive and wait for rescue. William Harper stood in the colony's command center, watching the displays in horror as red warning indicators spread across the map. The Krell were bombing residential areas, deliberately targeting civilians. His training kicked in, and he started coordinating evacuations, directing people to the underground shelters that had been built years ago just in case. He managed to send out a distress signal through the backup communications array before the building shook from a nearby impact. On the screen, he could see Krell dropships landing on the outskirts of the colony. Ground troops were coming. He grabbed a rifle from the emergency locker, something he had not held since his military service decades ago, and headed for the evacuation shelters. His people needed time to escape, and he would buy them that time. Lisa Garrett watched her sensors light up with hostile contacts. One moment space had been empty. The next moment there were dozens of Krell warships dropping out of faster-than-light travel. She immediately sent a priority alert to Earth and began tracking the enemy vessels. Outpost Meridian had no weapons capable of fighting warships, but they could at least provide intelligence. She watched helplessly as the Krell fleet split up, groups of ships heading toward 3 different human colonies. New Terra was taking the worst of it. Then the Krell noticed the outpost and 3 warships broke formation, heading straight for them. She ordered her crew to abandon station, to get to the escape pods while they still could. As the last person left, Lisa sent one final transmission to Earth. She included everything the sensors had captured about the Krell ships, their weapons, their tactics. If humanity was going to fight back, they would need this information. Then she ran for her own escape pod. Behind her, Outpost Meridian exploded as Krell missiles tore through its hull. The pod scattered into space, tiny lifeboats carrying the survivors away from the burning wreckage. On New Terra, Sophie huddled with her students in the shelter as the bombardment continued above. The lights flickered and dust fell from the ceiling with each impact. The children cried and she held them, singing softly to keep them calm. She did not know if Jake was alive. She did not know if her father was alive. All she knew was that the peaceful life they had built was burning. Outside, Krell soldiers moved through the ruined streets, rounding up survivors. The attack had been swift and brutal. 12,000 colonists lay dead in the rubble. 8,000 more were being herded onto transport ships, taken as slaves according to Krell custom. The dragons had been sleeping, and now the galaxy would see what happened when you made them open their eyes. The news reached Earth through the quantum communication network within hours of the attack. President Nathan Cross was in a meeting when his aide burst through the door, her face pale and her hands shaking. She showed him the footage from New Terra, grainy images captured by security cameras before they went offline. Buildings collapsed under orbital bombardment. People running through streets as Krell soldiers gunned them down. Children screaming for parents who would never answer. 3 colonies had been hit simultaneously, but New Terra had suffered the worst. 12,000 dead and 8,000 missing. taken by the Krell for purposes too horrible to imagine. Cross watched the footage 3 times before he could speak. His advisors waited in silence, knowing that whatever came next would change everything. For 2 generations, humanity had lived in peace. The resource wars of 2156 had been so devastating that the survivors swore they would never fight like that again. Billions had died over water and minerals and oil. The planet had nearly become uninhabitable. From those ashes, humanity had built something better, a unified government dedicated to peace and exploration. They had reached for the stars with open hands, not clenched fists. And now this. Cross stood and walked to the window, looking out over the capital city where millions of people were just beginning to hear the news. Protests would start soon, some demanding revenge and others begging for restraint. He knew what he had to do, what every leader who came before him had hoped would never be necessary. He turned to his military advisors and spoke one word that had not been uttered in 70 years. Sentinel. The advisors exchanged glances and then nodded. One of them made a secure call that would wake up people in secret facilities across Earth, Luna, and Mars. Protocol Sentinel was being activated. The public did not know what that meant yet, but they would learn soon enough. Cross returned to his desk and began preparing the speech that would introduce humanity to its own hidden nature. Colonel Daniel Hayes was tending his garden when the call came. He had retired from military service 15 years ago after the Mars Rebellion, a brief uprising of colonial separatists that had been resolved with minimal bloodshed. Since then, he had lived quietly on his farm, growing vegetables and trying to forget the things he had seen and done in uniform. The phone rang with a priority tone he had not heard in decades. He almost did not answer, but old habits died hard. The voice on the other end gave him a code phrase that made his blood run cold. Sentinel was active. He was being recalled to duty. 6 hours later, he stood in a facility buried deep beneath the Colorado Rockies, a place that officially did not exist. Admiral Patricia Cole greeted him with a firm handshake and tired eyes. General Marcus Webb stood beside her, looking like he had aged 10 years in the past day. They led Hayes through security checkpoints and biometric scanners, down elevators that descended so far his ears popped from the pressure change. Finally, they reached a control room where dozens of technicians worked at computer stations, bringing systems online that had been dormant for decades. Admiral Cole pulled up a holographic display and began the briefing. She told Hayes about the Dragon program, a secret that had been kept from the public and most of the government since the end of the resource wars. When humanity united under one banner and promised peace, the leaders had recognized a harsh truth. Peace was wonderful, but it only lasted as long as you had the strength to defend it. So while humanity publicly dismantled its military and focused on exploration, a small group of scientists and engineers had been working in secret. They had been building weapons that would make the resource wars look like children throwing stones. The hologram showed 6 massive ships, each one dwarfing the largest cargo vessels in the human fleet. Fury-class battle carriers named after legendary dragons from Earth mythology, Smaug, Fafnir, Drogon, Bahamut, Tiamat, and Ankalagan. They had been built in hidden shipyards, tested in remote star systems, and then mothballed in secure locations across the solar system. Small crews maintained them, running diagnostics and keeping the systems ready, but they believed they were guarding relics that would never be needed. The ships incorporated technology that was decades ahead of anything the public knew existed. Quantum shielding that could absorb incredible amounts of damage, graviton cannons that could tear through armor like paper, faster-than-light drives that made conventional engines look like bicycle motors. General Webb activated another display showing fighter craft unlike anything Hayes had ever seen, the Wrath Neural Combat System, a technology that allowed pilots to interface directly with their ships through neural implants. A pilot wearing the Wrath system did not fly the fighter. They became the fighter. Their reflexes were enhanced, their perception expanded, their reaction time reduced to near instantaneous. In simulations, a single Wrath pilot could defeat 10 conventional fighters. Webb explained that they had 300 pilots trained and ready, young men and women who had been told they were part of an experimental program. They had no idea they were about to go to war. Hayes felt like he was in a dream. All those years of peace and humanity had been hiding dragons in the basement. He asked the obvious question, why keep it secret from everyone, even from the military itself? Admiral Cole answered with brutal honesty, because humans needed to believe in peace. If the public knew these weapons existed, there would always be voices calling to use them. Politicians would rattle sabers. Fear would poison the dream of a peaceful civilization. So the weapons slept, guarded by people who believed in that dream but understood the nightmare that might require them to wake up. Now the nightmare had arrived. Cole told Hayes he was being given command of the Smaug. His mission was to rescue the captured colonists, neutralize the Krell Northern Fleet, and send a message to the galaxy that humanity was not defenseless prey. She handed him a data chip containing everything they knew about Krell technology, tactics, and the location of their staging areas. Then she told him something that made his hands clench into fists. The Krell had taken humans as slaves. They had processing facilities on 3 different worlds where they broke captives and sold them to the highest bidder. Some of the colonists from New Terra were probably already there. Hayes looked at the hologram of the Smaug and felt a cold anger settling into his bones. He had hoped to never wear a uniform again, to never give orders that would send people to their deaths. But some things were worth fighting for, and bringing those people home was one of them. He accepted command and began assembling his crew. Within 24 hours, he had his executive officer, Commander Victor Lang, a sharp tactical mind who had been working as a consultant for civilian shipping companies. His chief engineer, Lieutenant Commander Grace Palmer, had been teaching at university, her students unaware that she knew more about advanced propulsion systems than anyone alive. Meanwhile, refugees from the 3 attacked colonies were being brought to medical stations throughout human space. Sophie Harper sat in a recovery room aboard a hospital ship, staring at the wall and seeing nothing. The doctors said she was physically fine, just some cuts and bruises from falling debris. They gave her medication to help her sleep, but the nightmares came anyway. In her dreams, she heard the children screaming, felt the building shake, watched the ceiling crack and fall. She had gotten her students to safety. All 23 of them had survived, but thousands of others had not been so lucky. Jake Morrison was found 3 days after the attack, emerging from the mining tunnels with 47 other survivors. He had tried to go back for Sophie, but the Krell ground troops had sealed off the residential districts. For 3 days he had hidden in the darkness, listening to the sounds of battle above, not knowing if his wife was alive or dead. When rescue ships finally arrived and the Krell withdrew, he made his way to the surface and searched through the shelters until he found her. They held each other and cried, surrounded by the ruins of everything they had built. Sophie's father, William, was not among the survivors. He had died holding the entrance to Shelter 7, buying time for 200 people to escape deeper underground. The Krell had shot him 17 times, but he had taken 5 of them down with him. They found his body 3 days later, still clutching the rifle. He would be buried with full honors, one of thousands who had died defending people they loved. Sophie received his personal effects in a sealed box and could not bring herself to open it. The survivors gave statements to military investigators, describing what they had seen. The Krell had not just attacked, they had hunted. They had gone from building to building, dragging people out and sorting them. The young and healthy were taken to transport ships. The old and injured were killed on the spot. Some witnesses reported that the Krell seemed to be enjoying themselves, laughing as they worked. This was not war to them. It was sport. President Cross addressed the world from the same podium where his predecessors had announced the end of the resource wars. His voice was steady, but his eyes held a fury that made people lean away from their screens. He explained what had happened to the colonies, showing some of the footage, though the worst of it was kept classified. He declared a state of emergency and announced that humanity would respond with force. Then he said something that confused most listeners but terrified those who understood. Protocol Sentinel was now active. The dragons were waking up. Across Earth, Luna, and Mars, hidden facilities began their activation sequences. Blast doors opened in asteroid bases and mountain complexes. The 6 Fury-class battle carriers powered up their fusion reactors, lights coming on in corridors that had been dark for years. Crews rushed to their stations, many of them still processing the fact that their theoretical training was about to become very real. In the pilot-ready rooms, 300 young men and women checked their Wrath neural implants and climbed into fighters. They had only flown in simulations. The Viridian Collective sent an urgent message to President Cross. Ambassador Kelleth, a being of pure energy contained in a crystalline shell, appeared in hologram form looking deeply troubled. He warned that the Krell would see any human response as weakness to be exploited. The Krell respected only overwhelming force and total victory. Keleth sadly admitted that the Viridians could not help. They were scientists and philosophers, not warriors. Their ships were unarmed. If they opposed the Krell, they would be crushed. Other alien species sent similar messages, offering sympathy but no aid. Humanity, it seemed, stood alone. Colonel Hayes stood on the bridge of the Smaug as it undocked from its hidden berth inside a hollowed asteroid. Through the view screen, he could see the other 5 battle carriers taking formation around them. The Dragon fleet was flying for the first time in 70 years. He opened a channel to the entire fleet and spoke simply. They were going to bring their people home and teach the Krell a lesson about attacking humans. Some would die in the attempt, but they would die knowing they stood between evil and innocent lives. That was a trade worth making. The 6 ships aligned themselves toward the edge of the solar system, where they could safely engage their faster-than-light drives. Earth's orbital space blazed with light as the quantum fusion reactors reached full power. People on the surface looked up and saw 6 new stars burning in the sky. Then, one by one, the dragons jumped away into the dark, leaving only the whisper of radiation in their wake. War Prince Zathros stood in the grand hall of the Krell Imperial Palace, basking in the praise of his superiors. The raids on the human colonies had been a complete success, exceeding all expectations. 3 settlements destroyed, thousands of the soft-skinned creatures killed, and over 10,000 prime specimens captured for the slave markets. The humans had not even attempted to fight back in any meaningful way. Their defense station had been swept aside like dust. Their distress signals had gone unanswered. Zathros was elevated to Supreme Commander of the Northern Fleet, a position of tremendous power and prestige. He immediately began planning additional strikes, eager to capitalize on what appeared to be humanity's complete military incompetence. The Krell Intelligence Division presented their analysis to the Imperial Council. Human territory showed no signs of military buildup. Their cargo ships continued on regular routes, unarmed and vulnerable. A few defense stations had increased their alert levels, but they were still laughably undermanned and underarmed. The humans appeared to be evacuating some of their outer colonies, pulling back toward their home system like frightened animals retreating to their den. The council members hissed with satisfaction. This was exactly the behavior they expected from a weak species. Some of the younger council members suggested that perhaps humanity simply needed more time to mobilize a response, but the elders dismissed such concerns. They had seen this pattern countless times before with other species. The humans were prey, nothing more. The Dragon fleet spent 2 weeks in the outer reaches of the solar system, far from prying eyes and civilian traffic. The crews underwent intensive training that pushed them to their limits. Many had military experience, but none had served on ships like these. The technology was overwhelming at first. Systems that responded to thought almost as quickly as to touch. Commander Victor Lang ran tactical drills 16 hours a day, teaching officers how to coordinate weapons that could destroy a city with a single shot. Lieutenant Commander Grace Palmer worked with her engineering teams to optimize the fusion reactors, squeezing every bit of performance from systems that already exceeded theoretical maximums. The fighter pilots had the hardest adjustment. Lieutenant Ryan Carter sat in his cockpit, feeling the neural interface connecting to the implant at the base of his skull. The sensation was unlike anything he had experienced before. The fighter's sensors became his eyes, giving him a 360-degree view of space around him. The engines became his limbs, responding to his thoughts faster than his hands ever could. The weapon systems integrated into his reflexes, targeting solutions appearing in his mind before he consciously thought about them. Commander Helen Wright led the pilot training, pushing her squadrons through increasingly complex combat scenarios. Some pilots washed out in the first week, unable to handle the sensory overload. Those who remained became something more than human, at least when they were plugged into their ships. Colonel Hayes held a briefing for all senior officers on the 3rd day of training. He laid out their mission with brutal clarity. They would strike the Krell staging area at Dromath Station, a massive military installation that served as the hub for the Northern Fleet. Intelligence indicated that most of the Krell warships that had attacked the colonies were there, along with support vessels and supply depots. The station also housed holding facilities where captured humans were being processed before being distributed to slave markets across Krell space. Hayes told his officers that their primary objective was rescuing those captives. Destroying the Krell fleet was secondary. Bringing their people home was all that mattered. Admiral Cole reviewed the battle plan and made only minor adjustments. The Dragon fleet would jump in close to Dromath Station, using the element of surprise to maximum advantage. The Fury-class battle carriers would engage the larger Krell warships, while the fighter squadrons swept smaller vessels and provided cover for the rescue operation. Special forces teams would board the station directly, fighting their way to the holding facilities and evacuating any humans they found. It was an aggressive plan that relied on speed and overwhelming firepower. If the Krell managed to organize a coordinated defense, the battle could turn into a prolonged slugging match that would cost lives on both sides. The fleet made its jump on the 14th day of training. 6 battle carriers vanished from the outer solar system and reappeared at the edge of the Dromath system, their arrival causing ripples in space-time that every sensor in the sector detected immediately. The Krell response was exactly what Hayes had predicted. Alarm klaxons wailed across Dromath Station as defense crews scrambled to their posts. Supreme Commander Zathros was in his command center when the report came in. 6 human ships had just appeared at the system's edge. He laughed at first, thinking it was some kind of mistake. 6 ships against his fleet of 200 warships was not an attack, it was suicide. He ordered his fleet to intercept and destroy the humans, wanting to capture at least one ship intact so they could study whatever pathetic weapons the humans thought would save them. The Krell fleet moved to engage, battle cruisers and destroyers taking formation around the station, while fighters launched from carrier bays. Zathros watched the tactical display with amusement as his ships outnumbered the humans by more than 30-1. This would be over in minutes. Then the humans opened fire and everything Zathros thought he knew about warfare became obsolete. The graviton. Cannons fired bolts of compressed gravity that punched through Krell shields like they were not even there. A Krell battle cruiser exploded in a ball of superheated plasma as its reactor was breached. Another ship tried to evade, but the quantum targeting systems tracked it effortlessly. 3 shots tearing it apart. The Krell fighters swarmed toward the human ships and then the Wrath pilots launched. 300 fighters exploding from the battle carrier hangars in perfect formation. Ryan Carter felt his consciousness expand as he entered combat mode. Time seemed to slow down, his enhanced perception showing him the trajectory of every enemy fighter, every missile, every weapons burst. He did not think about dodging. His body simply moved and the fighter responded instantly. He locked onto 3 Krell fighters and fired, his weapons guided by instincts he did not know he had. All 3 targets exploded before they even realized they were being tracked. Around him, his squadron moved like a single organism, each pilot aware of the others through the neural link they shared. The Krell fighters tried to match them, but it was like watching adults fight children. The human pilots were faster, more accurate, and far more coordinated. Commander Helen Wright led her squadron through the thickest concentration of enemy fighters, her voice calm over the communication channel as she called out targets and vectors. She destroyed 9 fighters in the first 5 minutes of combat and lost none of her own. The Krell tried to swarm individual human fighters, using their numeri, Cal advantage to overwhelm single targets, but the Wrath system allowed the pilots to watch each other's backs with perfect coordination. Every time Krell fighters grouped up, they created easy targets for the human weapons. The battle raged across the entire system. The Dragon battle carriers moved through the Krell fleet like sharks through schools of fish, their quantum shields absorbing damage that would have destroyed conventional warships. The Smaug took concentrated fire from 15 Krell destroyers and responded by destroying 4 of them, with a single broadside. The Tiamat pursued a group of fleeing cruisers, hunting them down one by one and leaving debris fields in its wake. The Bahamut provided cover for the assault shuttles that were heading toward Dromath Station, its point defense systems shooting down missiles and fighters that tried to intercept the rescue teams. Zathros watched his fleet die and could not comprehend what was happening. His ships outnumbered the humans. His weapons were proven technology. His crews were experienced warriors who had conquered dozens of systems. None of it mattered. The human ships moved faster, hit harder, and took damage that should have destroyed them. His fighter pilots were being slaughtered by enemies they could barely track. In less than an hour, half his fleet was destroyed or disabled. He sent out a priority transmission to the Krell homeworld, warning them that the humans were not what they appeared to be. Then a graviton bolt struck his flagships. Bridge and War Prince Zathros died without understanding. how completely he had misjudged his enemy. The assault shuttles reached Dromath Station and burned through the outer hull with plasma cutters. Special forces teams poured into the corridors, their powered armor making them nearly invulnerable to Krell's small arms. Lieutenant Sarah Morgan led her team through the station's lower levels, following intelligence reports to the holding facilities. They encountered heavy resistance, Krell soldiers fighting desperately to slow them down. The humans cut through them methodically, their training and equipment giving them an overwhelming advantage. Sarah's team reached the first holding facility and blasted open the doors. Inside were hundreds of humans in various states of injury and trauma. Some had been there since the initial attack. Others had been captured from previous raids that humanity had not even known about. Sarah's team began evacuating them immediately, calling for medical shuttles and providing emergency care to those too injured to walk. In another section of the station, a second team found Jake Morrison among a group of male captives who were being prepared for sale. He was emaciated and covered in bruises, but alive. The team got him onto a medical shuttle along with dozens of others. The Battle of Dromath Station lasted 3 hours from first contact to final mop-up operations. When it ended, the Krell Northern Fleet had ceased to exist as a fighting force. 67 warships were completely destroyed, reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Another 93 were disabled, drifting without power and leaking atmosphere. The remainder had fled into faster-than-light travel, abandoning their comrades to escape. Dromath Station itself was a burning wreck, its weapons batteries silenced and its docking facilities torn apart. Human casualties were remarkably light, 12 fighters lost, all pilots recovered by search and rescue teams. The Tiamat had taken heavy damage to its port side but was still operational. Colonel Hayes stood on the bridge of the Smaug, looking at the tactical display showing the aftermath of the battle. Over 7,000 human captives had been rescued from the station and other Krell facilities in the system. Medical teams were working around the clock to treat injuries and provide psychological support. Many of the rescued had been captive for months or even years, taken in raids that human authorities had assumed were accidents or pirate attacks. Now they knew the truth. Hayes opened a communication channel that broadcast on all Krell frequencies, military and civilian. His voice was cold and absolutely calm as he delivered his message. Humanity had come for its people and found them. Now the Krell had 72 hours to return every remaining human captive from every facility in their empire. If they complied, humanity would be satisfied with the destruction of the Northern Fleet. If they refused, the dragons would continue burning until nothing remained. The message repeated automatically, ensuring every Krell in the Empire would hear it. Then the dragon fleet jumped away, leaving the ruins of Dromath Station as a warning of what happened when you made humanity angry. The Krell Imperial Council convened an emergency session within hours of receiving the human ultimatum. The vast chamber echoed with angry voices as council members argued over what should be done. The loss of the Northern Fleet had sent shockwaves through the Empire. In 1,000 years of conquest, the Krell had never suffered such a devastating defeat. Younger council members urged immediate compliance with human demands, arguing that returning the captives was a small price to pay to avoid further losses. War Matron Shekra, the most senior member of the council, slammed her clawed hand on the ancient stone table and silenced the room with her fury. She spoke of tradition and honor, of the Krell way that had built an empire spanning hundreds of systems. To bow to threats from an inferior species would destroy everything the Krell had built. Other civilizations were watching this confrontation carefully. If the Krell showed weakness now, every subjugated species in their empire would rise up in rebellion. Client races that paid tribute would stop their payments. Rival powers would see opportunity in Krell vulnerability. Shekra argued that the humans had been lucky at Dromath Station, catching the fleet by surprise with weapons they had somehow kept hidden. In a fair fight, with the full might of the Krell military mobilized, humanity would fall like all the others before them. The debate raged for 2 full days, while the human deadline ticked down. President Nathan Cross watched from Earth as intelligence reports came in from various sources. The Viridian Collective sent worried messages, urging restraint from both sides. Other alien species maintained careful neutrality, though some that had suffered under Krell aggression were quietly hoping humanity would humble the Empire. On Earth itself, public opinion remained divided. Victory celebrations had broken out in some cities after news of the Dromath Station battle spread. People danced in the streets and praised the military forces they had not known existed until days ago. But others protested outside government buildings, holding signs demanding a return to peaceful principles. They argued that humanity was becoming the very thing they had fought to overcome, a violent civilization that solved problems with weapons. Sophie Harper sat in a counseling session aboard the medical station, talking to a therapist about her nightmares. The woman listened patiently as Sophie described the sounds of the attack, the feeling of helplessness as her world burned. Sophie's hand shook as she spoke about her father, about finding out he had died buying time for others to escape. The therapist told her that survivors' guilt was normal, that she should not blame herself for living when others died. But Sophie could not shake the feeling that she should have done more, should have saved more of her students, should have been there with her father at the end. When the session ended, she walked to the observation deck and stared out at the stars, wondering if there would ever be a time when she could look at them without remembering fire falling from the sky. Jake Morrison was in the medical bay, slowly recovering from months of captivity. The doctor said he would make a full physical recovery, but the psychological scars would take longer to heal. He had nightmares every time he closed his eyes, seeing the faces of other captives who had not survived. The Krell had treated humans like livestock, sorting them by age and health, working them until they collapsed. Jake had watched people give up and die, simply losing the will to continue. He had survived by holding on to the image of Sophie, telling himself every day that he would see her again. Now that he was free, he found himself struggling with anger that threatened to consume him. Part of him wanted the Dragon Fleet to burn every Krell world to ashes. Another part was horrified by that desire, knowing it made him no better than the ones who had hurt him. The 72-hour deadline passed with no response from the Krell Empire. Their answer came in the form of an official statement broadcast across all their communication networks. The Imperial Council declared that they would not negotiate with terrorists. The human captives were property of the Empire under Krell law and would be treated as such. Any further human aggression would be met with the full military might of the Krell, including attacks on human civilian targets. The message ended with a demand that humanity withdraw from the disputed sectors immediately or face total war. Admiral Patricia Cole received the Krell response aboard the Smaug and immediately convened a meeting of the senior command staff. Colonel Daniel Hayes argued for measured escalation, proposing they target Krell military installations one by one until the Empire was forced to negotiate. Commander Victor Lang disagreed, suggesting a massive show of force that would demonstrate humanity's overwhelming technological advantage. He wanted to deploy Project Hellfire, the weapon system that could destabilize a star and destroy entire solar systems. Lieutenant Commander Grace Palmer listened to both arguments and then spoke quietly, pointing out that once they crossed certain lines there would be no going back. Humanity had maintained its moral authority by responding to aggression with precision strikes. If they started destroying worlds, they would become the monsters in the story. President Cross faced the hardest decision of his administration. He consulted with world leaders, military strategists, and civilian advisors. Some urged caution and continued diplomatic efforts. Others demanded immediate and overwhelming retaliation. Cross locked himself in his office for 6 hours, reviewing casualty projections and strategic assessments. Finally, he emerged and gave the authorization. Operation Reckoning would proceed. The Dragon Fleet would strike Krell military targets across their empire, dismantling their capacity to wage war while minimizing civilian casualties. The goal was not genocide but compliance. Make it clear that continued resistance would only bring more pain. The 6 battle carriers split up, each targeting a different sector of Krell space. The Smaug jumped to the Kelrath system where a major shipyard constructed Krell warships. The Fafnir targeted a training facility that produced the Empire's officer corps. The Drogon went after supply depots that fed the Krell war machine. The Bahamut, Tiamat, and Ankalagan struck fleet staging areas where reserve forces were gathering. The attacks were coordinated to begin simultaneously, giving the Krell no time to mount an organized defense. Colonel Hayes watched from the Smaug's bridge as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel above Kelrath. The shipyard was massive, a structure that stretched for hundreds of kilometers and employed thousands of workers. Hayes gave the order to target only the military construction bays, avoiding the civilian sections where families lived. The graviton cannons spoke and the shipyard began to break apart. enormous sections tumbling away into space. Escape pods launched from all sections as workers fled the destruction. Hayes tracked each pod, ensuring they were picked up by Krell rescue ships. He would destroy their ability to build warships, but he would not murder workers who were just doing their jobs. Across Krell space, similar scenes played out. Training facilities were reduced to rubble. Supply depots exploded in massive fireballs. Fleet staging areas became debris fields. The Krell military tried to respond, but their ships were outmatched in every category. Some commanders chose to surrender rather than send their crews to certain death. Others fought to the last, going down with their ships in displays of courage that earned respect even from their enemies. By the end of the first day of Operation Reckoning, 30% of the Krell military infrastructure was destroyed or heavily damaged. Simultaneously, special operations teams launched raids on 3 Krell worlds where intelligence indicated human captives were being held. Lieutenant Sarah Morgan led her team to a slave processing center on Krell Prime itself, the Empire's capital world. They inserted via stealth dropships, using advanced cloaking technology to avoid detection. The raid was surgical and precise. Morgan's team breached the facility, neutralized the guards, and extracted 217 human captives. Among them were colonists from raids that had occurred over the past 5 years. People whose disappearances had been classified as accidents or attributed to space pirates. The freed captives were transported to medical ships waiting at the edge of the system. Jake Morrison was among those rescued in a separate operation on the industrial world of Thranix. He had been transferred there just days after his initial capture, part of a group being sold to factory owners who used slave labor in their mining operations. The rescue team found him working in a processing plant, his hands raw from handling toxic materials without proper protection. When the soldiers burst through the doors, Jake thought at first he was hallucinating from exposure to the chemicals. But they were real human soldiers in advanced armor who called him by name and told him he was going home. He collapsed into their arms and wept. Over the course of 3 days, Operation Reckoning rescued more than 7,000 additional human captives from various locations across Krell space. Medical teams worked frantically to treat injuries ranging from malnutrition to radiation exposure. Psychologists provided immediate crisis counseling. Many of the rescued were in shock, unable to process that their ordeal was finally over. Some had been captive so long they had forgotten what freedom felt like. The ships carrying them back to human space became floating hospitals, every resource dedicated to healing bodies and minds that had suffered unimaginable trauma. The cost to the Krell was severe. Their military strength had been cut nearly in half. Their shipbuilding capacity would take years to rebuild. Their training infrastructure was in ruins. But still the Imperial Council refused to surrender. War Matron Shekra, sensing that moderate voices on the council might try to negotiate, staged a coup. She had her soldiers arrest council members who spoke of compromise and executed them publicly as traitors. She declared herself supreme leader and announced that the Krell Empire would fight to total victory or total destruction. There would be no middle ground. Shekra began mobilizing every remaining ship in the Empire, calling in vessels from border patrols and client species. She demanded that subject races contribute ships and troops to the war effort. Some complied out of fear. Others saw opportunity in the chaos and declared independence instead. The Krell Empire began to fracture as subject species realized their masters were vulnerable. Shekra ignored the internal problems and focused on assembling the largest fleet the Krell had ever gathered. Over 500 warships from across the Empire converged on a staging area just outside Krell space. Intelligence reports reached Earth within days. The Krell were preparing a massive strike, and reconnaissance suggested their target was Earth itself. Shekra believed that if she destroyed humanity's homeworld, the Dragon fleet would be forced to surrender or would become irrelevant. Without Earth as a base of operations, human forces would wither and die. It was a desperate strategy, but potentially effective. The Krell Armada would arrive at Earth in less than 2 weeks. President Cross recalled all 6 Dragon battle carriers to defend the homeworld and began evacuating non-essential personnel from orbital stations. The final battle was coming, and nobody knew if humanity would survive it. Earth's orbital space became a fortress in the days before the Krell Armada's arrival. Defense platforms that had been considered obsolete were reactivated and upgraded with technology from the Dragon program. The 6 Fury-class battle carriers took up positions around the planet. forming a defensive perimeter that would force any attacker to fight through them before reaching the surface. Mars contributed every warship in its system defense force. Luna sent its patrol craft. The asteroid colonies dispatched armed mining vessels that had been hastily fitted with weapons. Every human in the solar system who could hold a weapon or pilot a ship volunteered to defend their homeworld. Colonel Daniel Hayes coordinated with Earth's planetary defense network from the bridge of the Smog. The tactical situation was clear and brutal. Even with the technological advantages of the Dragon fleet, the Krell outnumbered them by nearly 10-1. The coming battle would not be a quick strike like Dromath Station. This would be a prolonged slugging match where both sides would take heavy casualties. Hayes ran the simulations dozens of times and every scenario ended the same way. Humanity would win, but the cost would be devastating. Orbital infrastructure would be destroyed. Debris would rain down on the planet below. Thousands of defenders would die. But Earth would survive, and that was what mattered. Sophie Harper stood in the observation deck of the refugee station, now relocated to a position behind Mars for safety. She watched the news broadcast showing Earth's preparations and felt a strange mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride that humanity was standing up for itself, that the dragons had awakened to protect the innocent. Sorrow that it had come to this, that the dream of peaceful exploration had been shattered by species who saw kindness as weakness. She thought about her father and all the others who had died at New Terra. They had not died for nothing. Their sacrifice had shown humanity what needed to be done. She only hoped the price of survival would not be too high. Jake Morrison sat in a therapy group with other rescued captives, listening to people share their experiences. Some wanted revenge, demanding that the Krell be wiped out completely. Others just wanted to forget, to move on and rebuild their lives. A few spoke about forgiveness, about breaking the cycle of violence. Jake understood all these feelings because he felt them all himself. Part of him wanted to volunteer for the defense fleet and kill as many Krell as possible. Another part just wanted to hold Sophie and never let go. He was broken in ways that would take years to heal. But at least he was alive and free. That had to count for something. President Nathan Cross addressed the world one final time before the battle. He stood before the cameras without notes, speaking from his heart. He told the people of Earth that what was coming, she would test them like nothing in their history. Not the resource wars, not the colonization of space, nothing compared to this moment. An enemy was coming to destroy their home, to kill everyone they loved, to erase humanity from the galaxy. But humanity would not go quietly. They had built something beautiful in the ashes of their worst conflicts. They had reached for the stars with hope. And now they would defend what they built with everything they had. Cross ended his speech with simple words that would be remembered for generations. We are not victims, we are survivors, and we will show the universe what that means. The Krell Armada entered the solar system 2 weeks after the Battle of Dromath Station. Over 500 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the system's edge. A fleet so massive that its combined mass created measurable gravitational distortions. War Matron Shekra stood in the command center of her dreadnought, the largest warship the Krell had ever built. She looked at the tactical display showing Earth's defenses and smiled with savage satisfaction. The humans had gathered every ship they possessed, but they were still hopelessly outnumbered. She opened a communication channel and broadcast her demands. Humanity would surrender unconditionally, deliver all Dragon Fleet technology, and submit to Krell authority. She gave them 6 hours to comply, or she would reduce Earth to a lifeless rock. The response came from President Cross himself. He thanked Shekra for making the choice clear. Humanity had tried peace and been attacked. They had shown restraint and been met with defiance. They had offered chances for negotiation and been answered with threats. Now there would be no more warnings, no more mercy, no more hesitation. Humanity would send one final message to the Krell and to every other species watching. Attack humans at your own peril. Cross ended the transmission and gave Admiral Patricia Cole authorization to engage. The Battle of Earth began at 0600 hours Solar Standard Time. The Krell fleet advanced in a massive formation designed to overwhelm the defenders through sheer weight of numbers. The Dragon battle carriers opened fire first, their graviton cannons reaching across millions of kilometers to strike the leading edge of the Krell formation. Warships exploded in brilliant flashes of light. The Krell returned fire with everything they had, thousands of missiles and energy weapons converging on the human defenders. The quantum shields on the Fury-class ships held, but the strain was immense. Warning alerts sounded as power levels fluctuated under the sustained bombardment. Lieutenant Ryan Carter launched from the Smaug along with his entire squadron. The moment his Wrath system activated, the chaos of battle became crystal clear. He could see the trajectories of every missile, the firing solutions of every enemy ship, the positions of every friendly fighter. His squadron moved as one organism, a fluid dance of destruction that tore through the Krell fighter screen. Commander Helen Wright's voice came over the communication channel, calm and steady as she coordinated the fighter wings. They were outnumbered 5-1, but the Wrath pilots fought like demons. Every human fighter that fell took 10 Krell with it. The battle raged for hours. The Dragon fleet fought magnificently, each battle carrier accounting for dozens of enemy ships. The Bahamut took heavy fire protecting a damaged defense platform, its shields flickering as they absorbed punishment that would have vaporized conventional warships. The Tiamat, still damaged from the previous battle, fought from a defensive position near Luna, using the moon's mass as cover while its guns never stopped firing. The Ankalagan pursued a group of Krell cruisers that tried to flank the defensive line, hunting them down and destroying them before they could threaten Earth's orbital infrastructure. But the numerical advantage was telling. Defense platforms exploded one by one as Krell weapons found their marks. Hundreds of brave men and women died manning those stations, buying time with their lives. The mining vessels from the asteroid colonies fought with desperate courage, ramming Krell destroyers when their weapons ran dry. Mars patrol craft engaged in close-range firefights, their crews knowing they were outmatched but refusing to retreat. The Krell were paying a terrible price for every meter they advanced, but they were advancing. 6 hours into the battle, the Tiamat took a direct hit to its main reactor. The battle carrier listed badly, venting atmosphere from dozens of hull breaches. Its captain gave the order to abandon ship, and the crew began evacuating to escape pods. The Tiamat fired one final broadside that destroyed 3 Krell warships. Then its reactor went critical, and the great ship died in a ball of nuclear fire. The loss sent a shock through the human fleet. For the first time, one of the dragons had fallen. Colonel Hayes watched the battle unfold from the Smaug's bridge and knew they were losing. Not quickly, not without making the Krell pay dearly, but losing nonetheless. Commander Victor Lang looked at him, and both men understood what had to be done. Hayes opened a secure channel to President Cross and requested authorization for final measures. Cross hesitated for exactly 3 seconds, then gave permission. Hayes turned to his navigation officer and gave coordinates. The Smaug was going to make a jump that would change everything. The battle carrier broke from formation, accelerating away from Earth at maximum speed. War Matron Shekra noticed the movement and ordered ships to pursue, thinking the human commander was fleeing. But the Smaug did not retreat to safety. Instead, it jumped into faster-than-light travel, vanishing from the battlefield. It reappeared in the Krell home system, alone and vulnerable, directly above their homeworld. Hayes walked to the weapons station where Dr. Lawrence Kim, the chief scientist of Project Hellfire, was already preparing the system. The Hellfire array began deploying from the Smaug's hull, a massive structure of emitters and focusing lenses that extended for kilometers. Kim's hand shook as he entered the activation codes. This weapon had never been tested at full power. The simulations said it would work, that it could destabilize a star and cause it to expand, consuming any planets in the inner system. But simulations were not reality. If something went wrong, the Smaug would be destroyed and Earth would still fall. Hayes did not activate the weapon. Instead, he opened a communication channel that broadcast to every receiver on the Krell homeworld. He made sure that every citizen, every soldier, every government official would hear his words. He explained what the device did, showing them technical readouts and simulations. He told them he could activate it with a single command and their sun would expand, consuming their planet and all its moons. Everyone they loved would die. Their entire civilization would be erased. And then he told them something that would be debated by historians for centuries. He did not want to do it. Hayes spoke about humanity's dream of peace, about how they had hidden weapons like this because they hoped never to use them. He talked about the colonists who had been killed, the thousands taken as slaves, the families destroyed by Krell aggression. He explained that humanity had the power to end the Krell completely, but chose not to, even after everything that had happened. But that choice required the Krell to make their own choice, stop fighting, recall the fleet, Except that humanity would not be conquered, or continue on the current path and face extinction. Hayes set a timer for 15 minutes and waited. On the Krell homeworld, panic spread like wildfire. Civilians poured into the streets demanding their leaders save them. Military commanders tried to maintain order, but their troops refused to obey when their own families were threatened. The traditional power structures collapsed as ordinary Krell confronted the reality that their empire's aggression had brought them to the edge of annihilation. Young Krell, who had grown up hearing stories of conquest, saw that those stories always ended with someone losing. They had never imagined it might be them. News networks broadcast images of the human ship hanging in orbit, the weapon array glowing with barely contained power. Religious leaders prayed. Parents held their children. The empire that had conquered for 1,000 years faced its own mortality. With 3 minutes remaining on the timer, War Matron Shekra received a transmission from the Krell homeworld. A coalition of civilian leaders and moderate military officers had seized control of the government. They ordered the immediate withdrawal of all Krell forces from Earth and unconditional surrender. They transmitted command codes that would override fleet orders and force every ship to stand down. Shekra stared at the message in disbelief and then fury. The Empire was surrendering. The Krell were bowing to inferior beings. She would not accept it. Shekra activated her dreadnought self-destruct sequence, choosing death over dishonor. But her crew had heard the orders from Homeworld. They mutinied, subduing their commander and deactivating the self-destruct. The rest of the Krell fleet received the surrender order and complied. Ships stopped firing, powered down weapons, and began withdrawing from Earth space. The Battle of Earth ended not with a final explosion, but with sudden, eerie silence. Hayes deactivated the Hellfire array and ordered it retracted. He had not fired. Humanity had stood at the edge of genocide and chosen mercy. The message was sent not just to the Krell, but to every species in the galaxy. Humanity could destroy but chose not to. That restraint, that choice, was their true strength. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed. The Krell Empire began the painful process of reform, abandoning their conquest-based culture. Subject species gained independence or autonomy. The Viridian Collective offered formal alliance with humanity. Other civilizations sought diplomatic relations, treating humans with respect they had not shown before. Earth's reputation as a peaceful species was gone, but replaced with something more valuable. The reputation as a species that valued peace enough to fight for it, but was wise enough to show mercy when they won. Sophie Harper returned to New Terra with other survivors to rebuild. This time a Dragon Fleet patrol station orbited overhead. The settlement would rise again, stronger and safer. She planted flowers in a memorial garden where her father's name was carved in stone alongside thousands of others. They had died so that others could live freely. That sacrifice meant something. Ryan Carter retired from active service and began teaching at the new Naval Academy. He told his students about the war, about what it cost and what it meant. His final words to each graduating class were always the same. We are not dragons by choice, but by necessity. The universe has predators, and they must know that humanity, when forced, can be the apex predator. But our true strength lies in choosing not to be until we must. The 6 Dragon battle carriers returned to their hidden berths. Only 5 now since the Tiamat had fallen. They powered down their weapons and went to sleep, maintained by skeleton crews waiting for the day they would hopefully never be needed again. But the galaxy remembered what happened when humanity was threatened. The sleeping dragons had awakened once, and that memory alone was enough to keep the peace.